All right, so Battle History of Israel. Everyone here is a repeat offender, I think. So here we are. Lord is warrior. Lord is his name. As I keep coming back, we want to just keep talking to this is another aspect of God. You know, we see a wealth of aspects of God throughout the Bible. I try to pull out some of the things that are a warrior, and one of the things that you'll see going through this is that there's even some inconsistencies in between even how much he really wants someone to follow his exact instructions. Like you might remember with Moses, it was the first time you can hit the rock with the staff, but the second time you're supposed to speak to the rock. And Moses hit the rock the second time, and God's like, "You're done, Moses. No promised land for you." And you're like, "Dude, I was just having a bad day. Come on." You'll see a couple things in here like that. So the recap from last week. The Egyptian Hittites, if you can imagine the normal powers who had somehow, the Egyptians in the south and the Hittites up in the north had basically sandwiched that area of Canaan, what we call now like the Levant, Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, Israel. And the trade routes that had gone through there from Egypt and what's now Turkey over to Mesopotamia, what's now like Iraq and Iran, it was strategic crossing points for a lot of different cultures and a lot of different areas. And so they were basically Egyptians and Hittites, both around the same time period, called 1200 BC or so, both having problems in and of themselves in their own empires. They were drawing back their military support. There was famine in the land. There was some levels, some people think there might have been some level of climate change such that there was like 40 years of droughts. And so just a lot of things were happening. Judges were getting people killed, even though Deborah and Barak got the W at the Battle of Gilboa and Megiddo. There were lots of losses, including the one time they decided to take the Ark out and lose the Ark of the Covenant, and not awesome. Saul became the king, but fractures among the tribes still exist. He does not have what we would call now a strong monarchy. And you've seen all these things. Again, I was just telling you before, the Hittites up here, Egyptians down here. Usually there was some mismatch of going back and forth on who owned what in here, but it was never the Canaanites, never really the Israelites, and it was just going back and forth between them. But this offered an opportunity up to David. Philistines, again, the bad dudes of the time, had come from kind of a Greek/Cretan stock, and really heavily armored. They had a professional warrior caste, and they're the first guys to show up with kind of the heavier iron chariots, which is why we keep telling the refrain, you never fight down in the green stuff. If you're the Israelites, you always try to fight up in the hills. Again, the basic geography of the place. Again, we're talking about places where you can actually get up and in a couple of days go from here to there. It's as if it was going from Tampa to Orlando or Tampa up to Jacksonville at kind of the farthest aspect of it. And again, the coastal plains here, and then the Jezreel Valley, very strategic points. That's where the bulk of the agriculture came in. This road of the kings right here, road of the sea right here, that went through the hills and met up with the road of the kings that was going through here and then on up into Mesopotamia. Again, very strategic aspects. And there were only a few ways to get up into the hills through a few of these valleys. If you'll notice here, there are cities that keep popping up in biblical literature, like Hebron down here, or Jerusalem that just happens to be like the head of this valley that just goes up there, or the plains of Jezreel, the Jezreel Valley here that's at Mount Gilboa, Mount Tabor, and then off into the Transjordan. All right, the last one we were talking about, the judge commanders. Basically, everyone did his own thing, and then that wasn't working, so that's how everyone kind of realized that Saul was going to be needed. But let's talk about the rise of David and the Israelite Empire. Everyone's kind of heard the story of David and Goliath. That's really the first time that we see David on the scene. Shepherd boy comes in, and it's kind of it's a cliche now. It's the David meets Goliath tale where, the heavy underdog goes up against the heavy favorite. It has no way of winning, no logical way that he should win. I don't know why he's in there, and somehow it turns up that he wins. But this was actually part of a battle called the Battle of the Valley of Terebinth, or Sisco. So, you guys probably can't read that. So anyway, here is Sisco right here. And as I'm going to keep pointing out, David, what color is that area around there? Do you ever fight in the green if you're Israel? No, except when Oh, that's where the Philistines come and line up their army, and they keep calling you out of the hills, going, come on, little girls, not really brave men, other words that are a lot more pejorative than that. And so eventually, David, who is from these areas up here, was taking stuff down to his brothers for lunch while they're sitting up in the hills getting yelled at by these Philistine guys. And basically, you've heard the story of why are you letting this guy talk about the God of Israel like that? That's not how we should do it. And they fought in a manner similar to, like, if you guys have seen Troy with Brad Pitt as Achilles and Eric Bana as Hector, a way that the Philistines fought, because this is right about the time of the Trojan War per Homer, you could grab your champion, I grab my champion, and why have all thousands of us die? Let's just have a one-on-one, and whoever the gods want to win, they'll win. So that's where you get to fight a battle down here in the green stuff and not get absolutely wiped out, because all it was David against Goliath. There are some really interesting things about Goliath. If you've read Malcolm Gladwell's book, David and Goliath, there's an excerpt in there on how, he pulls biblical aspects out and says things like, oh, well, if it says, he's kind of cross-eyed, he might have had this, and, this might have been hyperthyroidism, and he might have been shaking with his left hand because he had this thing that didn't allow him to really see, and blah, and blah, and blah, and really stacking up all the advantages that even though we might have said, wow, there's this guy that's almost 7 feet tall, 300 pounds, carrying all this armor and a huge sword and a spear that can go forever, and there's this little guy with a sling and some stones. Now remember, stones are like the size of tennis balls made of rock, going about 80 miles an hour. They can really kind of mess with you if you get hit by it. People didn't realize that you had to look past kind of the skin deep thing and realize that even in the most underdog versus heavy favorite, there are aspects that you can exploit and go from there. So anyway, David, of course, beats Goliath. You guys all know that. So basically, the Philistines retreat back away to Gath and Aphek and down to Gaza. And the Israelites go back up into the hills, and David is kind of cause célèbre up in Israel. Except that means that Saul gets super jealous of him. And this one is kind of an eye chart, but basically just to show you here, David is basically running all over Israel, taking his parents down here to Mizpah, going back. They think that the Dead Sea might have actually been a little bit low at the time because it's been climate change, years of drought, famine, whatever. So there was actually probably a land bridge or a ford right around here. So basically, thinking that he's going up through the hills, goes down, runs to the Philistines for a while. They say, get out of here, little boy. He goes back, goes down, almost gets caught a few times. And then he hears that there's this battle of Keilah right there. This is about halfway through all that. The Philistines have come up, and as you can see, it's right on the edge of the green and yellow. There's some hills there, but that was one of the main threshing floors of the Israelites. It was the people who were doing some agriculture down in the valleys, who were able to get some grain. That was one of their threshing floors, and it was one of the only kind of walled cities that the Israelites kind of had not really control of, but actually utilized. So David basically somehow has the ephod, now the casting lots part of the priesthood, and because, like I said, people are like, wow, this guy might be the chosen one. David goes to inquire of the priest, and he says, am I supposed to fight? And the Lord says, yep, go fight this guy. So David's like, sweet guys, my 600 men that are with me, my chosen guys, my mercenary warriors, we're going to go do this. And they're like, we're kind of scared. I don't know if this is what we're supposed to do. Those are the Philistines. Didn't you know that stuff? And we're right here down by the green stuff. And so David goes back to the Lord and says, kind of, hey, priest, can you just make sure that that's what we got? Like go, really? You might go? So this is one where normally, like if another prophet or priest or someone had gone back and asked the Lord, hey, are you sure about that? He might have turned to a pillar of stone or got caught on fire or something like that. David somehow gets away with this, goes back and says, nope, he was serious. We're supposed to go fight this. He goes and fights, and he wins. And so David saves this city from the Philistines. They run away, and David's now the face, basically, of the resistance, right? Saul has killed his thousands, David's killed his tens of thousands. You might have heard that. And so because he's here, David's kind of, I'm awesome, people like me, whatever. Saul hears about this, and he's like, I'm going to knock this out once and for all. David's got his 600 guys. I've got my 3,000 people in my trained army. We're going to go try to fight him. That goes back to, that was part 6. David now has another 7 or 8 steps of running around and running away from Saul. I don't want to get too much into it because you guys know the stories of where he was in the wilderness, all that kind of stuff. But the important part is that he eventually makes it up to a place called Ziklag. So there, in Samuel, it has kind of a weird back and forth. Like you'll be going through and you think, wait a second, didn't I just read this? And that seems like it repeats almost word for word what it was before, because Saul keeps going crazy and keeps throwing a spear at David, and then he keeps throwing a spear at Jonathan. And so what's going on here? So David basically, has to run away, becomes the leader of this band, like a formalized band now of the 600 guys, and goes to the prince of Aphek. Prince of Gath. We'll go up to Aphek in a second. And at Gath, basically the king of Gath, or prince of Gath, depending on how you want to translate it, says, man, the king hates you so badly that you've got to be kind of on our side. And we know that you're an awesome warrior because you've won these battles all up and down the place whenever you've had a chance. You've only had your 600 guys. So he goes, I'll tell you what, we're not going to let you join the army, but if you join my bodyguard, then you can live here in the city with us. You'll be, the second-hand man in the city to me. And he says, hey, Prince, King, whatever it is, I really appreciate that, but I don't need to be living up here in Gath with you and your kind of princes and kings and all that kind of stuff. Just give me a little city down in the south that I can kind of do my thing, and I will use that as a spring point for going and attacking the Israelites in the south. And King's like, okay, that sounds cool. So he sends him down to Ziklag, right down here. There is a picture, better picture, right here. Ziklag, total green, really out in the middle of the agricultural plain, coastal plain, but it has a lot of access through Beersheba and up into the hills in the south, has access to the north and up into the valleys that go up towards Hebron. And so David embarks on this guerrilla campaign where he goes and he attacks all the people that have not been cool to him. The Amalekites down south, the Gathites, the Gerizzites. And what he does is, if any one of these guys come back and tell the prince of the Philistines, hey, your boy David's killing us, then David's going to be in trouble. So he just wipes out everybody, men, women, children. And then he says, and then when he gets asked about it, it's interesting if you read this, he's like, no. I totally was attacking the Israelites in the Negev here, the southern hills here, and, totally I'm on your side, king, we're good. And he's like, sweet. So, as these things are going on, David wins battles. Now, what he's doing is it's kind of it's you might want to call it two-faced. Some people think he's on a strategic aspect here. He's going in and he's fighting the guys in the south here, the Philistines and some of the tribes of the Negev. He's bringing back the booty and the treasure. Remember, he's killing all the men, women, and children, so there's no witnesses on what he's doing. And he's bringing it back and he's giving them as bribes or booty or peace offerings, if you want to call it that, to his brethren of the tribe of Judah who were in the southern hills of Israel. There are a couple ways of doing this. One, Judah had never really been, even though it was a tribe, it had never really been a consolidated tribe like you see in the Judges. Hey, there was Manasseh and Ephraim and Gad, and they all got together and they fought these guys. Judah never did that kind of stuff. So not only were they kind of splintered among their own tribe, they were kind of splintered among the cities where the tribe lived, so that whenever there was a group of raiders that would come in, they would usually kind of get beaten down pretty hard because they never had a way to coalesce and come together. So what David did was, as he's winning all these battles down here, getting all this booty, he's sending it up here to the cities in southern Israel and kind of getting Judah together as a tribe. So he kind of becomes, almost a face of Judah, lion of the tribe of Judah back then. However, once again, people keep telling Saul, there's where David is. He's there at Ziklag. But Saul's smart. He's up here in the hills. This is green. Saul doesn't fight in the green. He's like, well, I guess David's off the Philistines now. I'm out of that. So he knows, though, that he's got to get his army together. He's got to do something. So he realizes there's a bunch of hills up here near Aphek, and right on the edge of the Jezreel Valley, where we've already won a couple of battles in the last 50 years or so. So let's just try that stuff again. So all the Philistines found out about this, and they're like, we're going to march up to Aphek, right about there. And the prince Achish of Gath goes, hey, David, you and your 600 guys, you're part of my retinue, part of my bodyguard. You're coming with us, right? And David's like, heck yeah, we're coming with you guys. Let's go. So he marches up there. And they get up to the battlefield, and they're all marshaling all the Philistine troops. And these Philistine commanders are going, hold on a second. That's David and his guys. And Achish's just like, yeah, I know. He's one of us now. And they're like, you sure he's one of us? And David's like, no, man, totally. I'm one of you guys. I promise. And they're like, I don't really feel comfortable with where all this is going. How about you just take your guys and you just go back home? And so Achish sends him back home. He is spared from being at the Battle of Mount Gilboa that we'll talk about in just a second. But since he's been away for a few days, the Amalekites, who were, again, those tribes in the south, they were the people, if you want to think back to Joshua, to Moses, as Moses was coming out of the wilderness, the first time, and they were getting ready to enter, and the Amalekites stormed on them from behind, came down the hillside, took out the women and children, the weak and the sick and the lame and the lazy, took a bunch of treasure, and Moses was like, all right, O'Doyle, your whole family's going down. And, come on, no Billy Madison references? All right, fair enough. But, yeah, I know. But the Amalekites, even going back to Exodus, God is like, you will wipe out the Amalekites. I don't want a single living, breathing soul of those guys to be around. Do you think the Israelites did that? Nope. So they're still around. They're still raiders. They're still, like I said, attacking the tribes in the south, mostly Judah at this point. And there's not really a whole lot they can do about it. They live by robbery. They live by pillage. And turns out that as David was on his way, turns out that he goes down there and he attacks them fiercely. It says not only does he kill men, women, and children, but he goes back to like the Moses time frame, and he's like, I'm killing all the animals here. Now, there's an interesting extra biblical aspect to this. Man, come on, man, you're like a shepherd. I mean, you like animals, right? Like, why are you killing all these things? If nothing else, like take the sheep and goats and all that and like make them your own. There's an extra biblical story that says that the tribe of the Amalekites, in some of the Egyptian testimony, says they might have been witches and shapeshifters. And so one of the hypotheses is that David, because he knew that he was supposed to kill every man, woman, and child like Samuel told them to do, turns out that he was like, I guess I'm just going to be safe and kill all the goats and sheep and cows too, because who knows if one of them might have shapeshifted into a cow. I'm supposed to kill all of them. So it turns out that he did. It's never really mentioned again. That's not exactly true. There's 400 of them that escape on camel. And now the tribe of the Amalekites doesn't really come up much anymore. But if you all remember the story of Esther, she came across a guy named Haman who was just kind of a bad dude, kind of just a thorn in the side of everybody, not really the most awesome. His family tree goes back to where he is an Amalekite, and they think that he might have been one of the descendants of the 400 that escaped on camel from David and his wrath. So once again, thorn in the side of the Israelites because you don't wipe them all out. All right, so like I said, they were up at a battle that they sent David home from, so what are the guys doing up here at the battle? Well, man, it looks like my writing is kind of garbage on this, so I apologize. So again, we're up at Mount Gilboa. We've been at Mount Gilboa a few times in this class, and this spur coming down here is this spur coming down like that. Now, if you look, I know it's a little bit hard to see, but the backside, the north side of this hillside is really, really steep. So basically, if you can set your guys up in the heights, anyone who's coming up with chariots or heavy infantry, it's going to be really, really hard for them to take you out. Saul knows this. Saul's actually a very good commander for being a king. And so he lines up his mostly light infantry, remember, here along the top of the hillside so that his back is, kind of covered. He doesn't think that they'll be coming up the backside anyway. And then, you can't really see this blue, I apologize. But then he sets up his heavier infantry regiments on the point of the hillside here, so right up there, because they're coming from the area around Shunem this hillside here where they probably had camped up, and they're coming across this way and basically attacking right on the point of the hillside. So Saul set up his troops like this, and he set himself kind of up in the middle here. Again, you can't really see it's light blue, but you see the light blue positions of the infantry. And the thing is, if as they come in and attack you, heavy infantry against light infantry, if you can hang on, great, but if you can't, just retreat up this really steep hillside here, and you'll probably get the advantage, and you'll be okay. Again, this is, in Saul's mind, he's thinking, if I can get him to come up the hillside, that's awesome, because I can't fight him down here. So early morning happens, and the cross is the infantry. The infantry comes down, and basically the Philistine infantry just hardcore attacks them right on the point of the hillside. They have a little bit of the feint going on the backside to keep these guys occupied. They can't just have them come down and help their boys on the other side of the mountain. But all these guys start getting pushed back and getting pushed up the hill. Saul, who's up on this kind of plateau up here overlooking the whole battle, thinks he's okay, and he's just, according to plan, the guys getting pushed back, they're going up the hill, they're okay. What he didn't realize is they brought their chariots with them. And the chariots had come around in kind of a loop. I've got it up here on both, but they come around in a loop to kind of the straight south side of Mount Gilboa. And if you follow the loop here, and I wish this picture was a little bit better, but you can almost see, like if you forget this tree's here in the way, that this becomes a lot gentler slope going up this way than it is over here where it's kind of almost straight up and really steep. There's a slope up here that's almost just like a ramp up to where Saul and his guys are. Why is that important? So the biblical account says that Saul was pierced by many arrows, and that was one of the reasons that he was there. And he's like, "Look, I'm wounded. My 3 sons all got killed. The infantry is all kind of holding down here and pushing him up the hillside, but Saul's getting attacked from. You would think, why is the king in a point where he's getting attacked? Well, the Philistines did not have archers except on those chariots as part of that combined arms team of the chariots, the spearmen, the javelins, and the infantry. So, hypothesis that these guys who made the loop coming up here made it to a ramp in the hillside here, got up close enough, started raining down arrows on Saul, and he realized not only is my flank breached, I'm now dying, my 3 sons are dead, so this is basically kind of it. And he does in various accounts, one of them is he does this on a sword. The second one is that, someone helps him out with his putting out of his misery. David doesn't love that, and turns out that he kills the Hittite that comes up anyway. But that is basically the demise of Saul at Mount Gilboa and against the Philistines. So let's go to David. He is not exactly king yet, so actually I'll go to the first part of this. So basically at this point, how to become the king of Judah. So Saul has sons. Ishbaal, his son, is now, since the king is dead, long live the king, his son is now the king. But he's basically the king of a bunch of scattered tribes that just got swamped in a battle that killed the king. So step one, the Philistines are like, okay, so now Israel is kind of jacked up. They're splintered factions. The king's dead. New king's a young kid. We've got this guy David who's an Israelite, and he's kind of in our pocket. So if we can kind of set him up in the south, kind of where we are, they can have strife between the south and the north. Even if David starts to win, he's one of our guys, and so we become blah 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 blah. And they're like, hey, that's cool. So they're like, here's what we're gonna do. We're going to let you do your thing down in the south. We talked about some of the battles, talked about the Amalekites, and then this was the thing too. If you see, I know all you guys read the Old Testament in Hebrew, like you should, right? But whenever you see the Gedud, that's 600. His 600 mercenaries. You'll see in the forest. He's there. 400 guys go fight. 200 guys stay back. Things like that. It's kind of his crew, but it's not the mighty men. And some people get that confused. The 30, the mighty men, are the Gibborim. So you can keep that straight in your head. That sometimes when you're reading, when you see, oh, he's one of David's soldiers. Well, there's between one of David's soldiers, his chosen men, and then the mighty men. We'll get to that in a second too. All right. So like I said, he's had kind of systematic bribery. Like, behold, hey, this has come from the Lord. Here you go, priests of the southern Israel towns. And so whenever the Philistines go, hey, why don't you try to become the king of Hebron? And he goes up to Hebron. He's like, hey guys, can I become the king of Judah? And all the priests get together and like, hey, well, we'll do this election thing. And sure enough, you're the only guy that's actually doing anything against these Philistine guys. And you've been kind of paying us off on the side. So sure, you seem like an awesome king. You're the king of Judah and you're here in Hebron. And so David does that. He gets his guys, his kind of 600, and he settles them in the towns and sets them up as, the tax collector and, the armory, warden and things like that. So because there had been no kind of history or culture of a monarchy, a strong monarchy within Israel, the Philistines are thinking, this is our way of getting basically civil war after civil war after civil war. We'll get these guys out of our hair. And if somehow our guy wins, great, but we don't think it's really going to happen. Turns out that David was actually, I say it like it's a surprise, David was smart about this. When he set himself up there, and like I said, he put some of his soldiers in each of the cities as kind of the government bureaucracy, he also called back the Kenites. Anyone remember what the Kenites were, what they did, what was important about them? They were the metalsmith guys. So because he's controlling the southern part of Israel, he's close to the mines of Sinai, especially the copper mines there. A little bit of the iron mines were over in Edom and southern Edom area, but he got access to the copper mines. So basically, from the beginning of him becoming basically king of Judah, just in the southern tribes at Hebron, he had already started thinking about how am I going to make this kind of a professional army? How am I going to scale this to where it's not just me and my 600 guys, but we can actually have an army? And he brought the Kenites back in. The last part of it, too, is this picture. If you read the biblical account at Mount Gilboa when Saul was killed, basically the Philistines took his armor, took his sword, took his crown, took his bracelet, took all the signs of the kingship with him, and hung his body on a door. His kinsmen from Gilead, Jabesh Gilead that we had talked about last week, basically came in the middle of the night, took his body, gave him a proper burial, but the Philistines all had the tokens of the kingship of Israel, and then they gave them to David and said, hey man, you're going to be the king of Israel? Here you go. Here's the scepter, here's the bracelet, here's the crown. Go for it. So, Battle of Gibeon's Pool. Again, this is another one of those let's not have a whole battle here. Let's just kind of face off. And Abner, who was basically the general for Israel, Saul's kind of line, and Joab, who is a relative of David and the general of kind of his guys, they basically came together at Gideon's Pool and says, we'll take my 12, you take your 12, we'll fight 12 on 12, and we'll see who wins. Sure enough, everyone dies, except Abner and Joab. Interestingly enough. So they're like, well, I guess it's a tie, so now we go to extra innings. Now all the armies come together and fight, and Abner of Israel loses pretty badly. David's army had been basically kind of a professional on-the-run mercenary army for about 10 years now. They'd been with him through thick and thin. Abner's guys were basically the people who had fought like the last two losing battles, and so there's already some kind of deleterious effect on the Israelite army, even against this fight from David. So Asahel, he's right up here. So he is another nephew of David. There's a whole bunch of, I had this slide up a couple times in here because Asahel follows Abner and challenges him to combat. And in the retreat, they go, sweet, they walk up to each other, and this is Abner, the general, shoving the butt of his spear through Asahel and killing Asahel. At this point, Joab, who's probably not happy that he just lost one of his better guys, especially a nephew of David, both agree to break up the fighting and go back home. So here, Gibeon was where the battle was. A few hundred guys. The Israelites go back to Mahanaim, and the southern guys go back to Hebron, where David has set up his kingdom. Interesting part about this is that Mahanaim is, it comes up over and over and over. It's basically the point where everyone goes to whenever you're like rebelling or trying to go to a place of refuge, like when Absalom takes over, spoiler alert, later on and revolts against David. David goes up to Mahanaim and basically takes shelter up there, and it's one of the cities where you can't really hurt us if we're up here. sanctuary cities. So, king of Israel, Saul's son Ishbaal up here in the north, David down here at Hebron in the south. Well, so the slide gives away, but there's the fall of the solid kingdom. So David goes, sweet, you've got guys up in the north here. I've got my guys down in the south here. Oops. I'm going to marry the daughter of the prince of Geshur right here. So now I have you on the south. I have allies up in the north. I married his daughter. You guys aren't really doing that great anyway. And I'm basically just kind of hemming you in on all sides at this point. So the war's going badly for Ishbaal. Abner decides, you know what, I've kind of seen enough here. I think I'm on the losing side. He goes down to David, and he's like, I'll tell you what, you make a pact with me, and I will bring all of the army with me. And David's like, sure. So again, spoiler, Joab, the commander of the army, is like, you killed my brother, prepare to die. And he kills Abner, even though David was cool with giving him the covenant and saying, hey man, if you'll come over to our side, all is forgiven. Because after all, I mean, you were just serving Saul's son, so I got it, but now you got to serve me or die. He did say to serve him and still died. But again, as long as Ishbaal lives, I mean, he's the rightful king, if you want to take a look at it that way. And so as long as he lives, David's claim is weak. David has no recourse anywhere in his line to kind of the blood of the kingship. So if you, per the kind of Mesopotamian rules of like mortal kings or the Egyptian rules of like the god kings, in neither one of them is David anything more than a puppet of the Philistines. So he realizes that he's got to, as long as Ishbaal lives, David can't really be a strong king. In a major coincidence, somehow Ishbaal is immediately assassinated as soon as Abner comes over with his guys, even up at Mahanaim, where you're supposed to be in the sanctuary. In some of the extra biblical writings, it talks about how there was a king in kind of a palace in a sanctuary city, and somehow guys were able to sneak in the middle of the night and kill him and then get away clean. They think it was kind of a bigger conspiracy of not just David's guys, but also some of the guys from the north. Anyway, David now, at 30 years old, in Hebron, becomes the king of all Israel. All the tribes get behind him, and yeah. So at this point, Philistines are not happy. They're like, hold on a second here. We were supposed to like break up the Israelite kingdom and turn into a big, huge civil war, and then even if one of them won, it was going to be like our guy. But you're not weak and divided anymore. In fact, you are stronger than you've ever been. You control the hill country, you control the trade routes, and you're sitting as the king of all Israel in Hebron. All right, we're not going to do this. We haven't been this mad at an Israelite since that dude pulled our building down. Samson, by the way. So they attack at a place called Rephaim. So it is up here in the yellow. So normally like the Israelites would have a fighting chance. The Philistines probably wouldn't worry about going up there. But remember, they go up this water course that's on its way up to Gibeah at the valley of Rephaim. Once again, David's like, I'm a light fighter. Me and my 600 guys, we fight out in the hillsides. We attack at night. We attack really quickly. We get out of the way quickly. We don't have standing like me on you battles. I will, tough guy. They're like, we know we're not going to win against heavy infantry and chariots, so we're just going to do things our way. He evacuates Hebron. He doesn't want to get stuck in a walled city, and he goes out into the hillsides. And basically, as they come up the valley and up the water course, he has what we might call today harassing attacks along the way, where he never has one like major battle, but he just kind of picks them off here and there, skirmishes here and there, and wins a series of battles. And eventually, after getting picked off, the Philistine army is no more. They just go home. And therefore, David now has kind of all of southern Israel conquered militarily. Except there's this one spot right there, right in the middle of it all. Jerusalem. So Jerusalem, or Jebus at the time, it had been an independent city for roughly 1,000 years. The Egyptians and the Philistines, they wanted nothing to do with it. They were like, you're in a strategic spot. You own kind of the approaches to two different major roadways. You're in this walled city on a hill. You're basically impervious to siege. It's easily defended. It's basically an impregnable fortress. And as long as we can kind of have an understanding that you let our trade go through, you don't mess with our trade, all that kind of stuff, we have no reason to quarrel. Even Joshua, when he came through, he attacked at Jericho, he attacked at Ai, he got that treaty with the Gibeonites, and just kind of left Jebus alone and went down to the south and then went to the north and then covered it all. And he's like, sweet, we've conquered the whole thing, except that this city right here in the middle of Jerusalem is still not conquered. David's like, I think we're gonna do something about that. So it talks in the Bible, though, about how David marches up to Jerusalem, and the city folk of Jerusalem are like laughing at him. It's almost like, the Monty Python thing, like, laughing at him from the wall, your mother smells of elderberries, that kind of thing. And they're just like, you can't fight us. So we were talking about hillsides and all that. So here's kind of a drawing of Jerusalem. This wouldn't have been exactly at the time, but the topography still stands. So long kind of, you're looking to the northwest right here. So the southern slope's kind of this long southern slope, and this is a cutaway. So imagine this goes all the way around. And then it kind of bridges up here, like almost coming to an 8, but this little neck right here is called the saddle. And then on the north side is where kind of the what is now the Temple Mount, but the large flatland was. Anyway, about 16 acres of Jerusalem. And as we've been kind of saying, about 240 people an acre could live roughly. So there's roughly 4,000 people in the city of Jerusalem. If you figure that, again, 1 in 4 guys in the military age, 1 in 4 people in military age male is able to fight, you've got about 1,000 to 1,500 fighters who are trying to defend this thing. And David's got like maybe 600 people in his army. And so they literally just laugh at him. Like, not only, like we beat off people who are super outnumber us. You've got 600, what are you gonna do here? So again, slope on the south side, deep slopes on the east, west, and north. And so basically they're like, we'll just stand here on the wall and wait for you. We have this spring coming up through the middle of our city that's, unlike the one in Jericho, not poisoned and not going to kill us. And so we can basically sit here as long as you want to and can't do anything about it. So it's funny because in the Bible, it talks about how David said something to the effect of, we're going to attack you and we're going to attack every one of you Jebusites and hit you in the windpipe, and you'll know that I serve the Lord. And you're like, hit you in the windpipe? What does that mean? Well, again, going back to there may be other meanings of certain words, and one of the other meanings of this word is water channel or water tunnel or water course. And so what they think probably happened is that there is the spring that's fed through, comes up this way, through the hillside, and then this is where it taps into kind of the tunnel up to inner Jerusalem, right? Especially in the old days. So what they think might have happened is that David and his guys tunneled in, might not have been all 600, but somebody made it up here, made it up into the tunnel, went up to where the water people came to get their water, and they entered the city, took it from the inside, threw open the gates, the guys rushed in, and they took over the city. So you might be thinking, he's kind of tricksy that way. Here's his tactical brilliance. 3 people in history, 3, have taken Jerusalem by force. David, Nebuchadnezzar, and Titus of Rome. That's it. 5,000 years of people, 3 of them have taken over the city by force. David's one of them. So now that he owns this city and probably blocks up that tunnel at some point, he's like, hey, this is impregnable. We're going to make this capital, and we're going to bring the Ark of the Covenant. We talked about last week, the Ark of the Covenant had been sitting after gotten back from the Philistines at Kiryat Yarim, and he goes, let's bring this back to Jerusalem. If you remember, one of the guys tried to touch on the way, got stoned, literally. And so like, whoa, okay, we're going to keep it at this guy's house for a little bit. That guy turned out kept it for 20 years. And it had been kept 20 years. That guy kept it 3 months. They realized, yeah, it's probably safe now as long as we obey the rules of God. And then that's when David went dancing almost naked in front of it up to Jerusalem as he entered Jerusalem as the king. And his wife, Michal, however you want to say that, was just, as my wife probably would do, shaking her head in abject humiliation at what her husband, the king, was doing. But, he was dancing almost naked in front of the Ark of the Covenant, bringing it home to Jerusalem, where he was not going to be the king of all Israel. So, the guy's probably entitled to be a little bit happy. So, Philistines are like, okay, one last gasp. We can't let this guy have Jerusalem. So they come again up that watercourse, up the valley of Sorin, up here to the lowlands of Rephaim. And David's army, not only did they come from the hills and down, but they kind of ambushed them up here in the lowlands. It doesn't really talk a lot about the tactics of the battle, but it does talk about the fact that it was ambushed and that the Philistines had to retreat all the way to Gezer. Of note, this is where David goes from being a tactical commander to a strategic commander. He realizes he's got the entire Philistine army on the run now. He's beaten them in three straight battles, and now he owns all of the hill country. They can't get up there. This could be one kind of coup de grace for him to be able to take out the Philistines once for all. He doesn't have a mandate to take out the Philistines once and for all, though. As long as he has them kind of under his control, he's okay with that. Additionally, he's still worried of the Egyptians. The Egyptians are now starting to feel their oats after about 100 years of being kind of down in the dumps. And he realizes that if somehow the Egyptians think that we've taken over their allies, the Philistines, and now we own that country, the Egyptians are going to come back. May not be today, may not be tomorrow, may not be in 20 years, but the Egyptians are going to come back and they're going to try to wipe us out. So it at least makes sense for us to say, no, we just hold them in subjugation, they still own the cities. Your route to Egypt is still safe. We're not going to invade down there, but we are going to tax the heck out of these guys and kind of own control of their land. And the Egyptians are like, okay, I will stipulate. So now it's on. As I said, David owns all of the Central Hill country and most of the land of the northern tribes. He already attacked the Philistines, got them under his way. He goes down, finishes off the Amalekites, got that done. And now basically all the ites come into play. Psalm 60, where he's talking about some of his victorious battles. There are things like Moab is a vessel for washing my feet, and keeps going on from there and basically saying I have subjugated and made, I'm not allowed to say that in church, I've made these people my servants and they have to basically worship who I am kind of thing. And so the Edomites, the Moabites, and the Ammonites. Interestingly enough, so they think it went in this order. Actually, I apologize. I should have said this from the beginning. If you read the biblical narrative, they're probably not, it doesn't. The chronology does not go in the way that I've laid out these battles. The reason I've done that is that while I believe that every word of the Bible is true, it doesn't say, and then David went here, and then David went here, and then David went here, and 3 days later he went here, like it does with some of the Joshua narrative or even some of the Saul narrative. So what they think might have happened is that it was built thematically on how he was taking over, where he was trying to go, and how these other things came in. So for instance, it wouldn't make a lot of sense if he fought the Edomites, and then fought the Ammonites, and then fought the Moabites, and then went up to Aram, and then fought down here again. And it just tactically and operationally doesn't make a lot of sense. So I've kind of laid it out the way I did. I may be completely wrong, but it's my hypothesis on it, so I'm kind of laying it out like this. So he goes down, takes out the Edomites. Remember I said the Edom is where some of the iron ore facilities are, and it also controls, if you go all the way down here, it's the port of the Negev, right? That's where he can get into the Red Sea and get a lot of the trade routes. So he has now all the mines in this area. He has a way for it to get down to the port cities and just starts working his way back up, goes to Moab, goes to Ammon. Ammon, though, is the Battle of Rabbah. And you guys may know this one as the one where David decided, hey guys, this year, and up until now he's been a brilliant tactical commander, hasn't lost battles, and he's like, guys, I'm a little bit smoked this time. Joab, you take the army, you guys go out there, I'm gonna sit at home, I'm just gonna be king and hang out, look out my patio window every once in a while. And that's where, he sees Bathsheba. I want to talk a little bit about this, not necessarily because of the biblical side of things on where, Bathsheba and David came from and the problems that caused, but the problems it caused for this guy Uriah. So Uriah was a Hittite. Again, he was a guy from up in that kind of area of Turkey, like the opposite of the Egyptians, but up there, was from his own kind of empire, but somehow had gotten brought in as one of David's 600 in his kind of mercenary times, and was actually thought of as one of the 30 mighty men at one point. But it's weird because he's always if they call out the mighty men list, he's always last or second to last. So I don't know if there's some kind of racist or xenophobic thing well, he's a really good fighter, man, but dude's like a Hittite. We don't really trust this guy, but whatever. Anyway, so the fact that he was in among the 30 mighty men means that he was very, very good at what he did and was one of the stronger warriors and stronger leaders there is. Comes back in, and I'll go kind of quickly through the story. David sees Bathsheba, they lay together, and she probably gets pregnant. And David's like, I got to cover this up. So he's like, hey, Uriah, come home, hang out with your wife for the night. And Uriah comes home, and he's like, I can't possibly lay with my wife when my men are all out of this battle at Rabbah. And David's like, oh, that sucks. So he's like, okay, come over tomorrow night. We're going to have a big feast for you. I want to hear everything about the battlefield. We're going to get you super drunk. And then I'm sure you go back and sleep in your own bed at night, right? And turns out that he got super drunk, and he was like, no, my military training is that my guy, I don't hang out with my wife when my guys are out in the field getting, fought at Rabbah. And so David's like, all right, cool. I got this. Hey, right, thanks. I appreciate it. Go back to the front. And by the way, take this letter with you to give it to Joab. So he gives it to Joab, the general of the army, and it basically says, stick Uriah on the front lines. No big deal. Uriah was used to being on the front lines, so for him, it's probably no big deal. And he says, and yeah, let all those guys back off of him. So he basically is like left all by himself and gets slaughtered. Except it didn't go exactly the way that David was hoping. Joab wins the battle. They're up against a walled city, and Joab does a great job of calling it. And then actually in 2 Samuel 12, Joab actually says, like, hey, David, like, you probably should be here, because if I win this battle, people are going to be like, hey, Joab was awesome and won that battle, not like, hey, praise be to David, he won that battle. And David's like, yeah, I don't care. So Joab's like, all right, so he wins the battle. And then so he sends a messenger back to David. And he's like, tell the king we won the battle. And then tell him that these 18 guys died probably out of his 600 kind of tight circle. He's going to be mad at that. But then after he gets mad, then just say, but your servant Uriah also lost his life. So sure enough, that's how it happens. He goes in, tells the king that 18 guys died. And David's now wondering, like, whoa, hang on a second. Like, we were fighting, I mean, yeah, it was a battle, but how come you were, and it actually is really cool on some of the ways that it calls out how specific it was. How is it you were so close to the wall that the women could throw their stones? Why weren't you at a certain distance for your sieges? Blah, 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 blah. And it kind of turns out that Uriah probably got stuck way up on the front line up against the wall where he probably shouldn't have been, but he was such a leader and a commander of his guys. He had such respect among his troops that the guys just weren't going to leave him. So 18 of the mightier warriors of the army died kind of with Uriah. So David was like super mad about that, but then he says, oh no, by the way, your servant Uriah is dead. And he's like, oh, well, so the battle was 6-6 then. Well done, Joab. So there's not a lot more that goes along to this. I mean, we can talk for days about some of the battles of David, the revolts against David. There's a ton of tactics. Absalom here kills Tamar. Kills his brother, Amnon, who raped Tamar. So all three of his oldest kids, all from the guy he married, whose daughter he married up in the north so he could win the battle against Saul's son. All three of those guys didn't make it out that well. And then in the forest of Ephraim, this is kind of fun. I didn't know what the forest of Ephraim was. I've heard about, the hills of Lebanon, the cedars of Lebanon, and all that kind of stuff. And it turns out the forest of Ephraim is actually like a pine forest that's much, much thicker than even the forests of Lebanon were at the time, at least, if you go by some of the extra biblical sources of the time. And so no wonder that Absalom, who was kind of I don't want to say pretty boy, but he was an accomplished rider, but he was very much into horses and chariots and not like David was, where he's like, no, I'm a light fighter, I'm on my feet, I've got a spear, I've got a sling, we move like ninjas. Turns out that, Absalom riding a horse got his hair caught up in this branch and broke his neck and, got pulled off and caught up in the tree. And he wasn't supposed to be killed. David said, bring him back home. I really want to take care of him. And Joab, again, smart general, realizes that Absalom can't live while being in civil war against David, and so he murders David. David doesn't like this. He gives control of his army to Amasa, and Amasa then is given control of somebody else, Sheba. Sheba has another revolting with the army against David. Joab goes in, crushes that. Sheba goes and runs to a city, and Joab says, hey guys, We know he's in there. Just bring him out. Nothing has to happen. We just want him. And they're like, all right, cool. They chop off his head. They hand it outside the wall. Joab takes the head and walks away. Yeah. So basically, you get the Godfather ending. David is getting pretty old. He's bedridden. Some people say he's senile. I don't know how much of that is Joab saying, how senile the king is and how much of it actually was. But his oldest, the remaining son, is Adonijah. Solomon knows that if Adonijah, who's the older son, is king, Solomon won't be king. Solomon's mother, Bathsheba, was kind of a favorite of David's, but he wasn't really in one of the strong positions of taking over the monarchy. Adonijah, again, similar to Absalom, was really big on chariots and horses. And at this time, it's actually kind of cool. We'll get into it in a second, I think. But at this time, they'd gone from being kind of poor people up in the hill country to 40 years later, they are like so wealthy that they're exporting grain. They can have their own chariots. Again, we'll talk about that in a second. But Joab, who's the nephew of David and the general of the army, is like, all right, man, Absalom's weak. Adonijah's the oldest son. David kind of likes Solomon, but David's kind of old and decrepit, and we don't really care what happens. So it turns out that everyone tries to, the guy, Benaiah, who is kind of like the Rocco of the Godfather, the right-hand man of Joab, right-hand man of Solomon, comes in and says, Adonijah, we think you're committing treason against our father the king, and so we're going to kill you now. So he runs into the tent of meeting, grabs the horns on the altar, and basically is like, I'm safe. I'm on base. Can't kill me. I'm on base. I'm free. I'm safe. And they're like, oh, you totally got us. And it's like, okay, we won't kill you then. Just come out. We won't kill you. And so he comes out, and they don't kill him. And then so Benaiah goes after Joab, and he's like, if you're around setting up these guys who are trying to take out my king Solomon, who's not the king yet, that's not what David would want, so I've got to kill you too. So Joab goes out and he's like, tent of meeting, I'm holding onto the horns, you can't kill me, I'm holding on to the tent of meeting. And they're like, yeah, that doesn't work for you, man. They kill him. So what they think happened is that the reforms that got started under Solomon probably got started under Joab, who was kind of a consummate military commander and was saying, if we're going to be this empire with this professional army, we're going to need to make sure that we do things in the right way. Let's start setting up so there's not one actual really strong guy king, but setting up 12 prefects throughout the area. Let's get it set up so we don't just take taxes all the time, but we only take taxes at 1 month of the year from a certain tribe and all those types of things. And basically he sets it up, but Solomon takes over and keeps the same things going, kills Joab. Adonijah, who we thought got away, he did get away. Solomon's like, I'm going to be the king. And Adonijah's like, that's cool, man. You've won. Just leave me alone. Let me live in peace and we'll call it good. And Solomon's like, actually, someone told me that you want to sleep with one of my concubines. That's like treason, dude. I got to kill you now. And so he gets killed by Benaiah again. So Solomon at this point has killed off, his dad has died. David has died. But he's killed off his dad's right-hand man, the general. He's killed off a couple of his brothers. He's killed off, the people who might be coming up in the army to support him. And now he's taken over. And his response is, well, Joab has also murdered Abner and Absalom and Amasa and Sheba. So, you live by the sword, you die by the sword, man, and went from there. So, how come David succeeded where Saul failed? First one was that he had a far more institutionalized monarchy. Again, Saul was kind of a weak guy, if you want to call him uneducated, pretty boy, whatever the case may be. Good fighter, but not someone that was going to bring together the 12 tribes and bring them onto one thing. David moved the war from the defensive to the offensive. When you're always fighting on the other guys' initiatives, you can never set up your own. You might win a couple battles here or there. You might retreat to your strong points like sandcastles when the tide is flowing, if you like your Tolkien. And he kind of came across an area where just kind of luck of the draw where the Egyptians weren't around, the Hittites weren't around, the Assyrians were weak. He got the Aramaeans and just had kind of a tactical brilliance. As I said, only a few people ever have taken over Jerusalem. He's one of them. So he was kind of what Sargon was to Sumer or Augustus was to Rome or Philip of Macedon was to Greece. I mean, he was the guy who basically got everything together, pulled it all in under force of will, got everything set up so that like the next guy could be, the emperor that did great things. And at the end, what David left for Solomon? David had basically the purple when he handed it off to Solomon, when he became king. He took over Aram, which is now Syria. He took over Ammon, which is now Jordan. Edom and Moab, again, I told you, he took over the port of Elath so he could have trade routes by sea to the south, to the west, to the north, and then the trade routes over to Mesopotamia. Interestingly enough, he fought off the Aramites, or the Aramaeans, and the Aramaeans were actually about to take over the Assyrians when the Assyrians were just kind of an up-and-coming empire. And so basically David, by taking out the Aramaeans and putting them under his sway, basically let the Assyrians roll for 100 years without any natural enemies, and that just turned out bad a couple hundred years later for the Israelites when the Assyrians came through and laid waste to them. So that's about it. I can go into I can do a study on Joab for probably 4 weeks, and there's plenty of stuff that we can talk about that I had planned for talking about in terms of what the exile looked like, what happened with all the kings. It seems like it was loss after loss after loss, and who are these guys coming in, and what did Rehoboam do, and why did Jeroboam do this, and Joash, why did he fight the Egyptians, and all that kind of stuff. Maybe we'll do that in Battle History of Israel Part 2, but I had fun with this. I hope you did too, and happy to take any questions about all that. Yes, sir.
So I'm really intrigued by the idea that this tribal society in the mountains, they can fight these defensive battles. They don't have a lot of, needs in terms of they don't need to have access to iron or whatever, but they're just a very simple thing. And then they expand out of that. Mm-hmm. And then they become, in some sense, far more vulnerable, you would think, even though they have more territory, it's much harder to hold, I would imagine. So that's very interesting. And I'm wondering, this boundary here, how is this compared to the extent promised by God? Is this roughly the full extent?
Actually, it's a little bit more than the Promised Land. So they didn't quite get to Tyre and then Sidon going up north. This is about the northern end up here, and then they had the Transjordan, Manasseh, Gad, and Reuben. Ammon was always a thorn in their side. The Ammonites.
So God, I didn't understand. You said this is more than God promised, or God promised even more than this?
No, this is more. So if you ask about when they say God is giving you the promised land of Canaan, it is from these borders here to these borders here. It is basically the Negev up Transjordan up to Tyre. So all this, not part of the promised land. Out in Egypt, not part of the promised land. Down here's the deserts of Saudi Arabia, so no big deal. But basically they'd expanded past what God had promised them.
And if we took God out of the picture, is there any way you think anyone could hold this for very long? Right? I mean, you're surrounded by lots of major empires.
It's funny that you say that. So this is the German problem of the 18 and 1900s, right? So once they became a strong state, so when they're 300 principalities that nobody cares about, no big deal. Why do we need to worry about putting my effort into taking all this over? But once they became a strong, cohesive national item, now they've got enemies to the west and to the east. Kind of sucks. So what's the way that you fight off? Well, like we just talked about, you don't wait for the enemy's initiative, you go on your own initiative. And so that would have been this. I would think that it would have been the same way for them. I think if, for instance, this would have been the Assyrians or the Babylonians or even Alexander and the Greeks, they absolutely could have held this, partially because they had the concept of going on the offensive and basically ruling through fear, wiping out every man, woman, and child, and putting everyone under your sway such that nobody wanted to mess with you. So that you could choose your offense at your own time. You could set up, they would probably set up a border with the Egyptians because you don't really want to come across a major world empire if you don't need to. But I think that they probably could have, and I think if they would have stayed together, if the
saying is they would have had to continue to expand. There's no possibility of staying at this size. They would have had
they, in my mind, just thinking off on the fly, they could probably set a boundary here with Egypt and call it good, as long as they had some level of, probably a big ramp up here at the border at the way of the sea. Like I said, the one route into Egypt. I think Egypt wouldn't have wanted to mess with them too much as long as they had access to the trade routes. I think that up here, right here is basically where the Euphrates River starts and then goes down into Mesopotamia, the Assyrians and Babylonians and all that. I don't know that they ever would have thought, we're cool with just leaving those guys alone, but I think you can own enough of the headwaters of the Tigris and the Euphrates and enough of that hill country up there such that you can, kind of own that area. And then I don't know that you would ever be able to make inroads into Turkey, so there'd probably be some level of border up there at the top of the Levant. But actually, I got one more. So yeah, you would basically have to set up something right here in the Cappadocia region and then hope that they didn't come down out of the north, set up with the Egyptians down here, and then, like I said, the Mesopotamians are probably coming over. I think it would have been really tough, but you would have had to be on the offensive to do it. And the Israelite kings following Solomon up until the deportation, they weren't of that mindset.
And with refresh my memory, there's something in the Pentateuch where they're told not to multiply chariots. This is something that Solomon does.
Yes.
And there's obviously theological reasons you can imagine for that, but is there any military, would there be a strategy that says, hold the hills, and don't commit to needing to defend anything else?
So that's absolutely the case. You trade.
The chariots commit them to stuff they don't want to be committed.
Yep, it's trading space for time, right? So even when David took Gezer or went down and fought the Philistines all the way to Gezer, he's like, why do I want to mess around with one more? Let's see, one more. Why do I want to mess around with this stuff down here when I can just kind of own the accesses to the hills? And as long as I own the accesses, then we're good, and I can fortify those. That's a method, and that's one that even he recognized. Even when he took over the Philistines, he's like, look, I don't need to have this the coastal plain. As long as they're giving me taxes, I can use it for agriculture. I don't need to own it per se. I don't need to have a guy in every town, but we're taking tribute from them. We'll call it good. No big deal. So in the expansion to, at the end, what David left Solomon, turns out that now that they own the Transjordan over here, now that they owned basically the valleys up here, the Jezreel Valley and up north, they had the trading ports of Tyre and Sidon, they had Gaza, they had a lot of the coastal plain here, or at least had it under their tribute, they had trade through Elath, they had all the mines down here. They basically became a very, very wealthy empire at that point. So they actually became a net exporter of grain for a while. They have Babylonian records that talk about that, Egyptian records that talk about that. And once they become a net exporter of grain, well, now you can have a whole bunch of horses and stuff that all they do is fight in your military. If you have chariots and horses now, remember, I can go back to the beginning, I guess, but all this area over here is kind of a plateau. It's not really hilly, but it's a raised plateau, which makes it super easy to have patrols of chariots and horsemen and things like that. In fact, that's how later on, the Babylonians and the Assyrians would fight through, is to have large-scale kind of scout parties, reconnaissance and force with chariots and those types of things. And the mobility of the chariots and the cavalry overcame the infantry aspect of it, and they just got handed to them. So to answer your question, I think that you saw it even in the biblical record with Absalom and Adonijah were super into chariots and horses, and let's be like the Egyptians, and this will be really cool, or let's be like the Philistines were, and let's have these big things. And David was like, dude, I'm a light fighter. Joab's like, hey man, we're light fighters. We fight in the hills. We don't necessarily go down. Who needs chariots? Who needs to grow your hair out? All that kind of stuff. And I think that you see that as almost one aspect of them getting away from their roots and trying to be more like the world, and ended up being the entrance to their disaster. But you're absolutely right. They got away from the let's trade space for time. Someone wants to take over the agricultural plain, fine, we'll come get it later, no big deal. We're not going to fight them on the plain because we don't have chariots and they do, or even if we had some, we don't want to get in that type of fight. We don't have the advantage there. After Solomon, they didn't care. Yes, sir.
Along those same lines, I've often heard it taught that Solomon's empire was a portrait of the golden age of Israel and its expansion that was a sign of God's blessing, and that Solomon was judged because of his affiliation with foreign gods.
Mm-hmm.
But one could argue from that part of Solomon's problem was that he overreached and he took on a territory that was greater than that which God.
So that's a great point, and it's the way that he did it too. Like Solomon didn't fight battles against the Hittites and the Arameans to take off more of the hill country. He married into it. Sheba, same thing. He married into it. The ports in the Sinai, he married into it. Pharaoh's daughter. Actually, that's how they got Gezer. Was that Pharaoh had said, hey, I want to come attack you, and Solomon's like, hey man, how about not? We just set up I think we can work this out. And the Pharaoh basically raised the town. Solomon kind of got on his good side. Then they hammered it out. And he's like, I'll tell you what, marry my daughter and you can have Gezer as your very own, which was one of their first actual cities in the green that they ever occupied. Turned out to be, a burned down dump when he got it, but they occupied it. And again, it was one of those, he was marrying through, or he was getting influence and his empire of land and space through dynastic marriages rather than through fighting for it, winning, wiping out men, women, and children. It's kind of really hard to, if we somehow got taken over by the Russians tomorrow, I'm pretty sure that we would take a long time to give up our God and our, freedom with guns and, our ability to go to school that we want to and all that kind of stuff. Similarly, just because your king married my queen doesn't mean I have to worship your God anymore. I'm not going to do that. Thanks, guys. This was a lot of fun.